Digitel is one of the leading companies helping associations leverage their content through event live streaming, webinars, and knowledge distribution. Take advantage of their 32 years of streaming success in generating revenue for their clients than any other company, hands down. For more information on Digitel, go to digitelinc.com.
Are you
10, 9, 8,
okay, so we're gonna probably add.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Executive Editor Beth Kormanik.
Ruud Janssen is founder of EventCanvas.org Foundation and co-founder of the event design consulting and training firm Event Model Generation. Now based in Switzerland, Janssen is a frequent speaker at industry events. And David, you had a chance to speak with him recently. Tell us about where you were.
He was at the PCMA New York City Day of Education, and he gave a great talk on making events much more manageable in terms of design, in terms of event design of all types. And I had a fascinating conversation with him about what he thinks is the future of taking design to the next level for events.
And it's a lot of the 20,000 foot overview of the landscape in terms of thinking about events. This isn't event design as in...
Not pretty.
Right, exactly. Not those type of things, but some really interesting things in terms you might listen out for are empathy mapping and how event design is really changing behavior. Right, David?
Yeah, it's all about how we're really programmers of human interaction, as I always say. And this kind of maps it out in a way that allows you to have a methodology. And it's a very sophisticated approach, and it really combines all the latest in the marketing think and event think and human dynamics and human resource think. It really is an interesting conversation.
Great. Let's take a listen.
How do I describe what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you would describe, I mean, Dave, the first time we met, right? Let's take us back.
I think it was alcohol involved.
Yeah, Event Camp Twin Cities back in Minneapolis, I think it was.
Yes,
that's where we first met in person.
Yes, it's kind of the beginning of the event camp movement that kind of actually petered out.
Yeah, and I think it's all about the experimentation that was going on at the time. People around the hashtag kind of started getting together. All these kind of
it was one of the greatest
radicals.
Experiences that I had in this industry that I still have warm feelings about everyone that I met at those initial meetings.
Yeah. And I think to me that's what it is we do, right? I think if you are able to put together events where, like the College of Extraordinary Experiences, so the promise of that event, which we didn't know until the event was done, was no person is there that you wouldn't like to speak to a second time. That was the promise of that event.
Say what this was.
So the College of Extraordinary Experiences was a wild experiment where in a castle in Poland, Czocha Castle, which looks like a Harry Potter castle, 70 people got together, which was a mix of very eclectic different types of people, from movie producers and comic artists to stand-up comedians, LARP specialists, business people, and anything in between. Getting together and spending 4 days in a fictional frame around beating the design Hydra. And it was just an awesome experience.
Go back, Design Hydra. Let's unpack that a little bit for people that are busy doing their PowerPoint presentations at their meetings.
Yes. So the Design Hydra is everything that is complacency, things that are holding you back. It's everything that really everybody encounters regularly in their daily lives, but especially when you put on events, because events are high stakes and experiences, right? If you're able to design experiences which are transformational, right, which change behavior to a degree that you wouldn't expect them to happen, I think to me that is the finest examples of event design.
But is it now, that's the holy grail now, it's transformational events, it's not just experiential.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, something that keeps us really busy, and this is why we created the Event Canvas, is we've done deep thinking about how people change behavior when different types of stakeholders are gathered, right? So it takes at least two different types of stakeholders to have an event, and if each of them changes behavior in the desired direction of change, then you're headed in the right direction with your event.
Unpack stakeholders, what you mean by that.
Stakeholders would be, let's take an event owner, right? The event owner would be somebody that says, I think we need to get these people in a room, and here's why. because they have an intent as to why they want specific groups of people to gather in a room.
And what are the normal intents?
Normal intents of behavior change could be amplify sales, change the attitude of a group of people towards a specific subject. It could be teaching skills or equipping them with a set of knowledge, or a combination of these 4 different things. The last one is the people learning, which is probably one of the most critical ones that we know that when they happen face to face.
Are you saying that there's really 4 basic intentions?
There's only 4 basic intentions, yeah. And it's the mix of those 4.
Go back again.
So you've got the people learning.
Number 1.
Attitude learning.
Number 2.
Skills learning.
Number 3.
And knowledge.
Number 4.
Yeah. And the mix of those 4, and how much you amp up the volume on each at what specific part in the experience journey, is really what creates the event design, right? So what I see when I go to an event, the behavior change I experience through those incremental steps, that is actually what event design is. Event design is nothing more and nothing less than framed behavior change. If you take the frame away from the design, it becomes art, right?
Okay, so let's go more deeper into that.
Yeah.
What are the different...
So in order to design an event, right? So in order to design an event, we wrote this up in a book called the Event Design Handbook, which we boiled down how to design events back to one piece of paper, and it took deep thinking for a long time for us to come up with that concept. It's available for free under Creative Commons because we want to create a common language for those that own events, those that execute events, those that are involved in events, can understand what it is that they're getting themselves into.
Well, also, I guess what's also important now, I've been studying the fact that we're in the era of the temporary marketplace and the temporary workplace.
Yes.
Does that fit into what you're doing?
It does. Because what you're looking at is, I think an event is an isolated period of time in which people are temporarily dislocated from their normal reality in order to change behavior faster or more effectively, right? So when people travel already, you start to go into a different mode of thinking. You're out of your normal routine, right? And by being in that moment, by being away from that daily reality, you're consciously thinking about what is changing in yourself and what's changing within others that are around the same table.
So this is the fuel for innovation.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the temporary marketplace, the temporary workplace,
and
what you're doing is giving this a form.
And I would push back on innovation because it's a term that is so overly used.
Okay.
Unless people know what innovation really, if they cannot put their finger on what the innovation is, if they cannot articulate what that innovation is, then it's a very difficult word to use as a fueler of design, right? Many events say, oh, it's a very innovative event.
Okay, so tell us, what do you mean by innovation then?
Exactly. So,
okay, what is your role?
And I then ask them, if you would put your finger on the innovation, where would it land on the event canvas, right? As you know, there's 14 different cubicles there, from entry behavior, the pain that is associated with the jobs you're trying to get done.
Entry behavior, what is that?
Entry behavior is how I walk into the event, literally. This morning you arrived at Javits Center, you walked into the door, and I take a picture of you, or I see your video. What do I see David Adler doing as he walks into this event? And you have jobs to be done in the back of your head of, why am I here today? What other jobs do I need to get done? Because you could get them done at an event, or you could get them done elsewhere, right? So by looking at that entry behavior, you're really assessing how somebody starts the event. The other thing that I'm interested in is the exit behavior, because the delta between the entry and the exit behavior is what creates the value, provided it's in the direction of change for which I've designed it to go.
And your blink assessment of how people are doing it now, for the most part, sucks. Is that an average? Is that a
Well, let's put it this way. I think there's a lot of mediocre. I think there's a lot of mediocre events around, and there's a lot of poor events around. There's some fantastic events around as well. I'm sure you would agree with me that totally. we try to celebrate, and I know you try to celebratize or even celebrate really good event design, because it needs to be pointed out. What makes that different from other design or from undesigned events, right? So if you let all of that go serendipitously without thinking about the outcome of how people walk away from that event as a specific stakeholder group, because the behavior change per stakeholder could be different that you design for. And by doing that consciously...
Give us an example of the journey of a typical stakeholder through your canvas.
So let me take you through... one of the things we say when you design an event is, shell out 1% of the total event time for event design. Right? Take your team, sit down consciously, or actually stand up in front of the wall, put up a big event canvas in front of you. We have this design studio we put up with pieces of paper. And we'll talk about that here a little bit later. But what happens there is let's say, if there's an event like today, 100 people spend 8 hours together. That is 800 man-hours of event hours. I would say it's wise to spend at least 1% of that total event time, 8 hours, to think carefully about what you're going to be doing with that 8 hours of 100 people. Now that 1% of time, if you have a team of 4 people, you could spend 2 hours in total analyzing the stake of the event owner and of the event participants. Take at least 2 would be my recommendation. We then go into empathy mapping. So we go into the shoes of that one stakeholder and we look through their eyes. We think and feel like them. We listen to their ears, right? What's coming into their ears. We're looking at the behaviors, what's happening, what they're demonstrating and they're saying and doing. We articulate their pains and gains, because those are the building blocks in the pre-event. And if you then know what you want them to do after the event in the say and do, how do they walk away from that event? And if I put the camera on David Adler as he walks out of the building,
right.
What do I then observe that has changed with David's behavior? And I think if you think of it like that, and you articulate what those things look like, and you start seeding the event canvas, because that's the start, you then have the entry behavior, which is a say and do of the empathy map. You've got the pains and the gains, which are really the 2 top tier things that you need to be able to identify. The expectations as you walk in, the jobs you're going to get done, and there are social, emotional jobs, functional jobs.
Oh, go back to that.
And
what are
basic
those,
needs.
Go into those. These are things that you're thinking about all the time.
Yes.
That others
Yeah.
may not even know that they're part of an event.
I'm sure you and others think of your jobs to be done all the time, right? So you know all these things you want to be doing that make you successful at what you do.
Right.
So the jobs to be done is really not that difficult as a concept to think about. It is difficult to think of them from somebody else's perspective. And this is where empathy mapping becomes a very powerful thing, but not something to ever attempt on your own. It is a team process. It's not a solo sport. So if you get 4 or 5 people to empathize with somebody else, think like somebody else for a minute, it's very easy to do. Your 7-year-old or your grandmother could do this.
So UBM, this big trade show company, has a process where they call it a day in the life of. Mm-hmm. And they actually spend a day in the life of their attendees. Yeah. Is that kind of what you're talking about in the first stage?
That could be something you do. So we tend to do a lot of now, we actually document experience journeys and actually go through this type of user experience where there's different ways of doing the qualitative and quantitative research around it. What we try to do is that we take the assumption that many people already know quite a lot of the stuff that they need to know about that person. All they have to do is spend a bit of time thinking about it. Once you've done the empathy mapping, there's a powerful thing you can do, David, which is actually take the empathy map, go to that stakeholder, and you hold it up in front of them, and you say, 4 people spend 20 minutes or 45 minutes thinking about you, right? Makes you feel pretty good, right? We'd just like you to take a look at it and point to us the 10 differences between what we think you think and what you really think. And you're going to help me identify, oh, this is great, you thought of this. This, that's completely different. You got that completely wrong. And they're going to help you adjust your empathy map of that person.
So where does the empathy map into the persona thing that's going on in marketing now?
What I'm interested in is the behaviors. That's what I want to isolate, right? When I isolate a stakeholder group, I want to isolate the behavior. The behavior
is that different than a persona?
The persona is the total picture. And I would say what I'm interested in is the behavior, because that is the only thing I'm trying to influence. So I'm being very specific. I do need to know what you're thinking and feeling. I do need to hear what you're hearing and what you're seeing through your eyes. I do need to know your pains and gains, because I know that the emotions are my amplifiers to changing your behavior, right? But ultimately, I focus on just the behavior change, because that's the most powerful thing you do. You can't think of everything all the time. If you have an event with 14 different stakeholders, we designed for them, but it becomes very complex. You try to go down to the bone marrow of behavior change.
What is enough of a group that you can? Is it 2 or is it 3? Everybody.
It could be a single person. It could be a single person.
But you're advising to look at it more simply.
The thing is, you need to simplify behavior to a degree where, as a group of people of very different understanding of that same person, you can combine your collective brain power, what your prefrontal cortex said. Because if you know what your experience simulator, thinking ahead of, if I do this to this person, here's the likely behavior change that's going to happen.
Right. So go back to the behaviors. Yeah. What are those behaviors again?
So the behaviors are driven by the emotions, right? The behaviors are everything you can observe with a camera. If I put a camera on you and I listen to what you say and do, that's the objectivized behavior I'm looking for. It's nothing more, nothing less than that. And so what you're doing is really, you're stripping it down to something that's very manageable, and then you're using that as an ingredient to frame the design problem. Right?
So give me an example of the behavior that you're break it down to so I can understand it.
Okay.
What's take one behavior that you're looking at?
So here's a behavior. Today, 130 people are coming in to learn about event design. What is event design? If you ask anybody, and we're going to ask that up front, what is event design to you in one word? You're going to get very different responses, right? To one person, it is, what does the room look like on the inside? To others, it's the color of the napkin. For other people, it is, what's the long-term behavior change you're realizing with a series of activities? So what's really important is to create a common language, a common vocabulary around how we talk about these things first. Because as meeting planners and event professionals, we know so much about behaviors and about how people behave at events, because we've been to many of them and we've seen what happens when behavior changes in the undesired direction of change. We have all sorts of ways to deal with that, right? So by asking people to step back and consciously think about behavior, just by observational power, is a very easy thing to do. We now actually map out behaviors and ask people, we equip them with a little app called Experience Fellow, where we ask them to map their experience journey as they go to the before, during, and after the event. And you actually see,
like what? Like going to the bar? I'm going to the bar, I'm going to have a conversation? Well,
this could be self-reported moments of enlightenment, right? These could be at the College of Extraordinary Experiences, an example. We said, okay, document every time you have an exceptional experience, just document it in that little place. So people could take a picture, a little video of the geolocation where they were, noted down what they felt, and an emotion from -2 to +2 in terms of how exceptional that experience was. It could be extremely poor or extremely rich experience. And by looking at the aggregated data behind it, you are actually doing something called ethnographic research, which people in experience design and people that are in sociology and in psychology use all the time.
So are you familiar with Alex Pentland and his work is called social physics? And
okay.
So we're now thinking about the way I've been studying it, things like you don't judge an event by how many people attend, but how many conversations you're curating, and it's the social physics of how ideas flow, and you're actually doing this, I think, in what your plan is here.
And by deliberately designing that as a small group of people with constraints, right? Because this is the design part. When you start finalizing the event canvas, what you're doing is you're adding constraints. This is the amount of time these people have that they can commit to. This is what they're expecting in return. Here's the amount of money that it may cost, and this is the return I'm expecting as a revenue. When you start adding those ingredients, expectations, satisfaction, right? The pains, the gains you already have, you have a promise, right? Today, the promise is that you will learn about event design and get snippets of what event design looks like today in 2017. It gets a number of jobs done for you. And within the experience journey and the instructional design, you prototype different ways of doing this. And prototyping is really what we have to allow ourselves to do more, like you said. Innovation happens when you reshuffle or recombine or reverse the order or do things that people don't expect, which helps them to change behavior faster or more effectively.
So go back and now tell me, when you're actually in the design phase of the experience, what does that look like?
Yeah. So once you have all the restrictions on the table, people have tons of ideas about what you could be doing. What you do is you go back to something called the idea quarantine, which is a place where you dump all the ideas ahead of time. And as you're going through the analytical process of analyzing the stakeholders, and when you framed your design, you actually go away from that design for a moment because that's a linear process. You go outside, take a walk, do something completely different, some lateral thinking, and you come back to the idea quarantine, and you hold your ideas up against your design frame to say, now, how would this change the behavior from A to B for that stakeholder, right? And how would that fit in? Would it best fit in the beginning, at the end, here, here, here? And every component in your idea quarantine has characteristics, right? Every idea that's there may get a number of jobs done, right? A movie clip may have the function of priming the thinking so that there's a level playing field in the room, right? In less than a minute. The function of a bottle of tequila in the middle of the table with salt and could have the impact of creating a social environment where people now know that it's okay to be a bit...
So these are the cues that you're creating. You're basically designing the cues to create the behaviors
to allow behavior to change.
Allowance, based on knowing it, thinking it ahead.
Based on that social physics you were just talking about. Right. Now it's allowed for us to be a little bit more brash about what we talk about than if we are in a polished
So the idea is
microphone.
actually the looks and feels and the colors and everything else go back to the frontal cortex and the neuroscience of things, but you're now able to sort of design it in a way, kind of the way that they're doing fast prototyping at Google, and things like that. So it's not different from.
So it's about creating, as we say, the canvas creates the design restrictions. It limits you, and by limiting you, it allows you to become a lot more creative, really, and it allows you to validate whether something makes sense or doesn't. The rapid prototyping allows you to come up not just with the first idea that you fell in love with initially, or anybody in your group fell in love with, to be challenged by others in the same group, and come up with maybe 3, 4, or 5 different prototypes. And I always add a 6th one, an extra one, which is, if we don't do this event, what behavior will not get changed, right? Which is the anti-problem, and is always a prototype. You always need to think of that as well, right? And by doing that consciously, time restricted, you now have 3, 4, or 5 ways in which you could do the event. You go back to the event owner and say, as a team of 6, we've thought about what we could be doing, and we've looked at your stake and of the participant, et cetera, et cetera. We've come up with 4 ways in which you could do this. There's A, B, C, D, E. And here's what they look like. What's going to happen in the mind of the event owner is that they're going to check off the box, I like that one, I don't like that idea. So they're going to have values associated to your prototypes, right? They're going to assess and judge whether they're going to be successful or not. And what you can do now is go back to the design frame and say, well, from that stakeholder's perspective, you may be right.
So basically you're using data of some sort.
You're using data that's coming out of the brain of a team.
Yeah, but you basically have some constraints around it.
Correct.
So it makes it so you're thinking.
And then the person will actually say, well, which design do you think is going to change the behavior most effectively? And now you've got them in the right zone, right? This is what you want them to be thinking. You're not thinking, should it be ballroom A, B, or C, and should we do 3 breakouts or 8? That's not the conversation at this point. Here it is really about, if you do this, then this was probably going to happen to this behavior and that behavior. If you try this, then this is going to happen. Our team believes that prototype C will work best because da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Have you learned anything from like on the sales side in terms of what works and what doesn't, so that you can actually take the data of the completed prototypes and figure out what are some of the things that work and some of the things that really are bombs?
Yeah, so teams on the event owner side are usually very daunted by their vendors, because the vendors have tons of ideas that they throw at them, but it's a problem-solution fit. They're trying to sell you something, which makes them feel very awkward very often because they haven't figured out in their mind really what it is their event is supposed to do.
That's interesting.
They need help figuring out what their events. They need somebody on their side, somebody that helps them think and create clarity about what is the behavior I'm trying to change, what are the options in which I could do that, and then what are the solutions that vendors and solution providers could bring into that process, or at what time do I use vendors to look at my event design in the past, right? Because there's different breaking points for using event design. It could very well be to look back at a last edition of your event, because in hindsight you have 20/20 vision, and you could analyze the stakes pretty well.
Are you saying though that a third-party planner may have a different perspective as a vendor than the owner of the event itself?
Yes,
they're trying to sell them things, so they have to justify it in better ways.
Yes, and once you're in when the event design process turns into a selling process back and forth, that is not ideal when you haven't figured out what the stakes are, right? So you've got to figure out, what the stakes are of the different people before you start frying the steak and determine whether it needs to be medium rare, or well done, right? And you've got to figure out exactly, literally, what each has at stake, have clarity about it, and then you can look at which solution will fit in best with these things.
Is there anything that this works best for in terms of
high stakes events?
What is a high stake event in your mind?
I'm going to show some examples later. Things like the Nuclear Security Summit, things like the College of Extraordinary Experiences, where we have a very diverse group of people together. We're currently working on event designs for United Nations events for.
Well, civic engagement. What do you think about what's going on here in America? Do you think that this has some implications in the protest movements that are happening? If you design protest movements or meetings around protest movements, will we be more effective?
So I think if you think of the stakes of different people, anything that is a gathering of 2 or more groups of people, it could be considered an event, right? So,
absolutely.
So I'm very encouraged if people would think more deliberately about how let's say the power of people, or how people get together, because I think that's what drives the events industry. We know that when you bring a group of people deliberately into a room thinking about something specific, or even in the open air, but you've got to guide them in the right direction, right? It's a force for good, but it can also be used as a force for bad. So I would also argue that people that can design events effectively can use them as a mean weapon if you want to use them in the wrong way.
Talk a little bit about, the mean weapon. When I was talking to the guys at the College of Extraordinary Experiences, they talk about how the uniforms were very important. Yeah. And I kind of brought that back to the Trump hats.
Okay.
And how that created tribes and created sort of ways that people can direct their contacts. And then we had the March in Washington with all the women wearing the pink hats, and at the same time we had all the inaugural people wearing their Trump hats.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting dynamic from an event perspective. But as part of design, would you design this in, or would you design this out, or is this a weapon that could be used? I mean, we don't want to go back to sort of what propaganda is about.
Well, I think you see it everywhere, right? So. From sports, which is probably the most legitimized way of using, tribes, because it rallies people around a very specific design frame. For European football, it is 2 times 45 minutes with a break in the middle.
So that's like the perfect prototype of a perfect event.
You can map that out very easily, and there's a winner and a loser, and everybody wants to win, and this is how it works. And there's 3 stakeholders: you team A, team B, and you've got the spectators, right? Or you may have the sponsors. So any type of event you could map out like that. A marriage you can map out. People walk in unmarried, they walk away married. Here's what happens in the middle.
So could you? We'd probably go back to this question in a minute, but can you sell pre-done event maps that people can use without having to think as much and do all the analysis piece?
Yeah. So what we're noticing is that some organizations have a very kind of crystallized way in which they do their events, which are a DNA footprint of them as an organization. I was just speaking to the people at the World Economic Forum last week, and or organizations like TED, they have a very crystallized way of doing their event, and because they do it in a specific way and blueprinted that demonstrates the DNA of their brand. That's how they do things. Many organizations want to discover what that is for them. So we train teams in corporations and organizations that say, we want to find our way of doing events. How would if I were blindfolded and go into an event for company Biotronic, for instance, who we're working with in Germany, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What are the typical characteristics of going to a Biotronic event? And you can, by design, you can create those brand elements that you can feel at that specific event. And I think the best events have that sense of tribalism used in a very positive way, right, for people to feel associated.
Well, Ben Parr, who wrote a book called Captivology, I don't know if you've heard about this book, he talks about a parasocial relationship, that is like the hottest thing going now, that Taylor Swift has a parasocial relationship, a two-way relationship with a fictional character.
Wow.
That Donald Trump had a two-way relationship with his fictional character. People have a two-way relationship with him. And events have parasocial relationships. Like when I go to watch TED, I feel smarter.
Yeah.
So there are certain DNA aspects of an event that rub off on you. Mm-hmm. So I assume that this enables you to create that DNA in a little bit smarter way. Well,
you engineer it slightly, and you can observe it by looking at iterations of it. And I think this is where it's a very powerful tool, David, where if you analyze the history of an event, of where it came from and its movement as to how it goes to where it goes, and how it will be used in the future, right? So in some of the work with the IOC, for instance, that we're doing, we deliberately look at the history of how the different types of events they do get to where they are, and how does that align with the 2030 United Nations goals, and how do those steps incrementally, how can you design for the 2020 event by looking at the 4 iterations and knowing you got 4 steps to get there. So what you're doing is you're taking the innovation, the big lump of innovation, you're breaking it down into 4 smaller chunks, identifying what are the 4 steps I can take within the time frame of that event. Maybe it's a 2-day or 4-day event. Right. And you're saying this is the maximum amount of behavior we can change at that one event. If we do a sequence of 4, we can change the incremental behavior between A and B.
So one last question, and then we have to end. What do you think the impact of AI will be on this process? Do you think that is going to have a huge change the canvas in a big way?
Well, I see the canvas as the tool for conversation, right? So I hope the conversation that people have emotionally will never leave the table, because that is what drives behavior change. Artificial intelligence will help us collect data around how I can observe that behavior, right? So when we're talking about entry and exit behavior, maybe in the future I can much more easily decode that by looking at the camera feed and getting the data in by emotional intelligence on faces and things like that.
But I assume that there would be a lot of data that's coming out of the event canvases that you can use so other people can reuse things using AI.
So here's our dream, right? I see down the line the IKEA store of event formats or of events, which allows you to have a huge repository of the different types of events that have already been successful in the past. Because by looking at things that have worked, and I know with your magazine you do a fantastic job of documenting events and giving the perspectives of all the different things that are happening in event land.
People want to peek over the fence and see what other people are doing. They can't do that.
And the thing is, if I'm not a carpenter, I still want to make a cupboard, right? And so I think, how do we equip the masses and how do we democratize event design to a degree where the level of the poor events comes up significantly by just giving many design pointers and standardizing and simplifying things to a degree where all you need to do is pick the color and the size of the box, and you're happy to assemble it yourself. And what we're doing now is we're having, with the event design certificate program, both for professionals and for students at universities, they're actually documenting events and sending that back for the community to use. Because if I can read it on a single piece of paper and understand how to read that, then the event canvas becomes to event design what sheet music has become to music.
But do you think that it's about the event designer, or is it the CEOs and the politicians understanding the power of events?
I think they already do understand it.
I don't think it's there yet, because I believe that Trump accidentally got into it, that Hillary talked to the crowds and didn't make anything come from the crowds. There was no outcome that worked. I think that in the U.S. we're seeing events not being as effective. I don't know what it's like around the world.
Well, I think by just that sheer observation, I think you've hit the nail on the head by saying those that master the art of knowing what drives behavior change, which is really, if change is the thing that takes the clock and innovation is what drives business, then knowing how to put the two together effectively, and not just by yourself solo in the back office, but by assembling a team of people who are able to do that with you consciously.
Yes.
And then articulate in 60 seconds, so it's not serendipitous and by chance. That's a skill that's going to be essential in the future.
Especially with the temporary workplace, that we're seeing already groups coming together for 30 days at a time from all around the world.
Yeah.
That becomes an event in itself.
Absolutely.
And the design of that interaction is not really being done in a way that is thoughtful enough.
Let me give you this example. There was a lady from Google, an instructional designer, who joined us at San Diego State in January for our program. And she went back to her team and she said, we're going to design the Google Learning Summit using this process. And she was kind of struck as an instructional designer that she was stuck in one of the boxes of the canvas and said, I've got to look at this bigger picture. And I love this because now I'm zooming out like from Street View to Google Earth View. She got our team together, which was not very easy for her to do. And she actually, in the first round, got people together who were in their 20% own time, the time that they can allocate within Google to work on a project they like. And she got people from across the organization to join her design project on this, to work on it. And so many people popped into the room looking at what was going on. They were very curious to find out what it is, that they're now taking the initiative to take this into the Google campus and open it up for people also from outside of Google to use this as a way to think about change.
Well, Google's doing great. I mean, Google I/O became one of the top 10 events that we covered this year because they completely rethought their events. I mean, the smart CEOs.
They went from inside to outside. They amped up to 7,000 people.
Thinking the way you're thinking. Now what you're doing is giving more structure to the
equipping their teams to think like this and go back to them with prototypes and say, dear CEO, we've thought about this deeply. We've done our homework. There's 8 hours of work in the room here. We thought deeply about it. This is not coincidental and not my opinion. This is a group's thinking. And now we're bringing this in front of you, and you can choose between A, B, C, D. And we think this one's going to work best. What do you think? Yep. The CEO is going to put their finger on the innovation and point at it and say, so for this stakeholder, you're changing this element, which means that this will be the resulting behavior change.
They will understand that.
They will get it like this.
They're data-driven in a way.
They will get it just like this.
This is kind of really a building block for the future. And so this is fantastic. I really love it.
It's very simple, but simplicity doesn't come easy, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, Ruud, how do people get in touch with you? How do they buy the book?
Eventcanvas.org. If they check the website, you can download the first 100 pages for free. We give half the book away because we know you love it that much. You want to buy the other half. It's going to be translated into Chinese, as a matter of fact, right now. We just got word of that. The canvas can be downloaded in now 11 different languages, which is translated by our volunteers, so that's free as well. And there's tons of resources that come with the book, examples, designs. We just want to empower the whole world to use this as a common language. That's our driver. And we encourage him to do that. So, reach out to us on eventcanvas.org. You'll find all the stuff you need, all the goodies, all the trainings that we give in different places across the planet.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.
Wow. David, there's a lot to unpack here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But one thing is, I think he makes a convincing argument that event design, when framed properly, can change the attendees' behavior.
Yeah, especially when we were talking about the climate conferences and the big government events, it really has a huge impact. Just imagine getting all those people together and not being productive with them.
Yeah. And I also liked how he said to be careful about using the word innovation. You really need to be clear what innovation is. It can be an overused term. We like to use it here, but we define it. I went to an event recently that promised innovative food. If you're going to make a claim like that, you really need to back it up. And I went and it wasn't so innovative. So I think that he did hit on something there.
Yeah, no, I think he's onto something. And the training that he's providing is going to really make for better event organizing from soup to nuts. And you did see the audience at the PCMA event really having their eyes wide open at this is a framework. Finally, there's a roadmap on how to do it. And I thought that was very interesting because I think there's a thirst for knowing how to do this stuff.
Right. It's an interesting approach that he's using too with Event Canvas, because that Event Canvas, the kind of basic, as he referred to it, kind of like a IKEA package for event design, they make that available for free through Creative Commons. And so this isn't just about people who have the time and resources to put into mapping their own experience. They kind of can get you started on that yourself.
And I love the idea that he makes you think about what you're doing. It's very conscious in terms of how he approaches everything, and it forces an event organizer to be equally as conscious about how they approach every aspect of an event.
Great. Thanks, David.
Yeah, this is great. Another great discussion. I get so much out of this. Thank you, Beth, for participating in these with us. What's going on at BizBash?
We just released our BizBash Best, which is our national venue and supplier guide, and it should be arriving either in your mailboxes or in your digital mailboxes by now.
Oh my God. I am so proud of our editorial team for putting together an amazing package of information, kind of the old fashioned way, in print and in digital form. And it is really, really, it's thick like the old Vogue magazines used to be.
The September issue.
September issue of Vogue. And I think that all event planners will really want to have this on their desks.
Definitely. And this is produced once a year, and it really is something that you can refer to throughout the year as a resource for you as you're planning events in New York, Los Angeles, Austin, really in any of these 17 cities. And if you're not planning events in those cities, we have a bunch of style ideas as well. So you can get tips on what's new and fresh in catering and meeting breaks, team building, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of ideas and inspiration in the book. So we're so proud to have it out now.
And the other thing that we just did was release our new website. This is the 5th time we've redesigned our entire website, and we've used some of the best UX experts, and we thought the way the material is being presented, and I think you'll find it really interesting. Beth toiled with her team for days and days on days to get it just right.
And months and months and months. So we're so proud to finally have it be available for event planners to use for, again, ideas, inspiration, and more.
Let us know what you think.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. If you are looking for a state-of-the-art learning management system, take a look at Digitel's newest platform, OpusDX. OpusDX offers the robust platform for event organizers and associations to manage content. To learn more and schedule a demo, email them at contactus@digitelinc.com. That's contact us at digitellinc.com.